Hello, welcome back. Today, I will be continuing to read from my book, Sparrowmancer. We are finishing chapter 6 today. So, without further ado, let's get started. They drove through the night. It snowed again, and the scrub lay white into the next day. The transhumans didn't pursue. Gone ruins appeared. Sparrow tried to talk to the stony girl. She wanted to be quiet, but she engaged. Maybe she felt that she had to for her fellow prisoner. He finally stopped crying, but he would only stare out the window. The girl told Sparrow that her name was Machuk, and that the staring man's name was Lomap. Sparrow couldn't imagine what tears Machuk was holding back. We swore to reject machines, Machuk explained. Lomap is a priest of the natural way. He is humiliated into silence. You don't have to accept machines to let yourselves be delivered out of bondage, Sparrow said. You don't understand Naveb, Machuk said. Her voice was bone cold and as brittle as a butterfly. You're right, Sparrow said. They crossed into a little town that looked mostly intact. The streets were clean and even. Most of the houses still had windows. They crouched like watching cats beside driveways that still had hover cars in them. Their closed doors were shadowed mouths. A neat neighborhood ran down a silent hill to a shopping district. There was a white-walled hospital with an ambulance in the bay. A large school slept, its windows boarded up, beside a raised bridge over black water. No nets remained on the windswept ball courts. The town was nice, but dead empty. Sparrow pulled into a service station to search it for fuel cells. Machuk and Lomap wouldn't get out of the car. Machuk tried to convince Sparrow to keep driving until the little town was behind them. This is a doomed place, she insisted. It's built on very bad land. I won't be long, Sparrow said. He slid out of the car, stretched his legs, and checked his wounds. He switched his pain receptors back on and winced as previously blocked hurt rushed into him. Then he checked the power cell stations. They were all empty. He went inside, pushing the offline auto door open. The floor tiles were rotting. There were some cans of food on the shelves, but they weren't pull-tab cans, and he didn't have a can opener. He took them anyway. The register was missing from the counter. In the back there was a dead man leaning over a pallet of product. Sparrow stood in the stockroom with the body, feeling like someone was there with him. He found some pull-tab cans of food, stuffed them into a grocery bag. and got out with the hair on the nape of his neck pricking up. "Let's stay the night here," Sparrow joked as he returned to the car and put the bag of cans in the back. "Maybe in one of those nice houses back up the hill." Machuk and Lomap looked stricken. "I'm joking," Sparrow said. He pressed the starter button. The car purred as he started down the tree-lined road out of town. "I think you're right about this place. There's something dark here. Bad magic. Maybe a curse." Machuk didn't reply. She slid down the bench seat and put her head on Lomap's shoulder. The silent priest watched trees go by as if he were looking into a cemetery. Days passed like sighs. The trees thinned again. Everything became flat. Gone ruins were black, devastated, sitting at the bottoms of craters. A long time ago, orbital cannons had fired on this part of the world. Piles reared up, huge walls of debris, some burning. Once, Sparrow saw a platform in the distance. It made him afraid, and it made him think of the Spire's Rangers. Darkness fell on Sparrow as he'd known it would. The harrowing caught him in its jaws and tried to swallow him. He wanted to stay positive for the Naveb's sake. It took everything he had to hold the harrowing back, like trying to catch an asteroid strike. The only things between the rock and the world were his bare hands. Sometimes he would slip, and when Machuk and Lomap saw his sadness, they would shrink away against the passenger door. They were probably in the worst days of their lives, and they needed a steady rescuer. Sparrow wanted to be strong, immovable, monolithic. After a week of searching his control trees, he found no way to disable emotion. Would he be of more comfort to them if he were more like the machine he was? Would they find solace in just his metal? He didn't know. He couldn't help them emotionally no matter what. That power was beyond him, so he embraced quiet. The weather began to warm. A shower washed most of the road dust off the car. Machuk told Sparrow that they had entered Naveb lands. The capital was on the beach, a great city made of white wood, its gates, hinges gilded. Yim. "Will they accept me there?" Sparrow asked, a thinking machine. "I don't know," Machuk replied. She assured Sparrow that he would find absolution in Yim. Lomap shook his head. When the hovercar's fuel cells ran out, they took anything they could from the car and started walking, pulling the hovercycle. They camped that night behind an enormous broken satellite dish. Sparrow used a transhuman's firelighter to light a hollow pyramid of twigs. There wasn't much wood to be found in this blasted wasteland. "How far down does this scorch go?" Sparrow asked Machuk. "Does it go all the way down to the ocean?" "This is our most sacred land," she said. "We were born here. The Naveb came from these craters, this burned field. The biggest crater is a shrine now, that's still far away. The burn doesn't reach Emby, the ocean. Sparrow nodded and opened a can for her. White beans. Were you born in the south? He asked. Machuk gave her white beans to Lomap. No, in Arel, she said. Those savages took me further south than I've ever been. There are no gone ruins in Arel. They've all been purged. Purged how? Burned, destroyed, scraped from the land, Machuk replied. The gone is a sickness. We have the cure. Sparrow looked into her eyes. They were harlequin green. Lomap's were dark as volcanic soil. Machuk was like a wary doe, ethereally pretty, but quick to disappear. Acne scars rode her chin, up her cheekbones to the bridge of her nose. Her mouth was a shining wire. Sparrow was glad the clips hadn't spoiled her. He didn't believe for a second that she really thought there were no gone cities in the north. She was just repeating what someone had told her. But she had had the fire in her to think, to consider. Sparrow knew the cracks this episode would leave in her faith. He had seen Wren change the same way. Where did you come from, Sparrow? Machuk asked. From the west, Sparrow replied. Beyond the desert. That's right. You're the Endworlder, Machuk said. I've heard of you. You murdered 4 Naveb in Pichmuk. Does that worry you? Machuk looked him up and down. He could read her little physical responses now. Along the drive, he'd discovered a voluminous file in his operating system, a database of gestures and expressions. According to that, Machuk was worried. No, she said, I don't fear machines. Machines fear me. I'll bet they do, Sparrow said. I'll bet you've killed plenty of us. You're right. Machuk crossed her arms. Sparrow looked into his database of expressions. It told him that crossing the arms was a protective gesture. She was defending herself from him. If you're going to kill me in my sleep, he said, smiling, will you let me know? You're making fun of me again, Machuk said, but I'm a warrior. I survived those savages. Do you know how long I was in their prison? I survived, and I kept Lomap alive, too. You can't do anything to me. You're right, Sparrow said, holding up his hands. You're right. That night, Sparrow dreamed of a doe at a stream, limned in white light. Her eyes were huge. There was a whole world in each one. An owl watched her from nearby. A shadow fell on both of them, and the light behind her slowly shrank. When it was gone, there was only breathing black, cruel sentience, all-consuming. Sparrow woke and stared at the stars in their infinite darkness. He thought about Leech's prosthetic hand, programmable matter. One of the transhumans had had a prosthetic arm. What had that meant? If he never saw the clips again, he would probably never see Jory or her rangers either. He had a feeling those groups shared some doom to dwindle together with all their secrets. He wouldn't be part of what would happen to them. That was good. Still, he hoped Rima was all right. The next morning they continued through the waste. Hot wind blew down from shrouded mountains in the east. Gaunt things fished the acidic pools for lights only Sparrow could see. They were whispers, catchers of candles. The lights they swallowed were the mindless embers of fragmented souls. They fled from Sparrow and the Nawab, but they watched the party constantly with spotlight eyes. Sparrow found it hard to believe that the burn could be holy. There was clear evil on it. He felt it close to his skin. It made fighting the dark inside him that much more difficult. He began to suspect that Machuk had doubts as well. Lomap walked the wastes like a starry pilgrim, cheeks permanently red, the loop of his long necklace in his clasped hands. "How did the clips capture you?" Sparrow asked Machuk. They were walking through an open expanse of scourged land, beside a rotting apple orchard. Here there were many gone vehicles. All were burned. Some had occupants. Now and then they would see a whisper curled asleep in a black back seat. "Were you with Lomap at the time?" Machuk took some time to answer. She was looking across the waste at nothing in particular, barely picking up her feet. Sparrow followed her gaze in the bright, blank horizon. "We were in a large party," Machuk finally said. "The savages found us near Mamul. We had never seen any such people before. They tried to take us and we fought. They killed all of us but Lomap and me." "How far is Mamul from the Clips compound?" Sparrow said. "I don't know." Machuk sounded distracted. "Why?" "I'm new here, and I'm trying to learn who's in the area. It seems there are many enemies, a lot of fighting." "You are a machine," Machuk snarled. "What do you care how we die?" "You pretend to intellectualize compassion," Sparrow said. "You're trying to stay inaccessible to me. You're human, and parts of me are human. In fact, I thought I was entirely human until recently. Why wouldn't I care?" Machuk stopped while Lomap got on one knee to pray before a shapeless hump of slag with a curtain rod jutting out of it, or rather, jutting out of it. "I'll never believe that you care the way we do," she said. "How would you know if my inner life were different from yours? Even very different. You don't know the way I care, machine. Your human parts are just a disguise." "I suppose you're right," Sparrow said. "I can't know how different we are. I have to use an interface just to read your expressions, and I've only recently discovered that. You'll just have to accept that I do care whether you live or die. Moreover, I'll act to protect you, whether my care is real or not. You have no reason to be loyal to us." "All right," Sparrow said. "You talked me out of it." They walked on, all getting tired. The terrain became too difficult to navigate on foot, so Sparrow mounted his hoverbike. He showed the Naveb how to balance on the footboards. They didn't want to at first, but they relented. He hoped they were beginning to trust him. Lomap remained an enigma, but Machuk seemed to be coming around a bit. He had been wrong about people before, though, and he was prone to wishful thinking. Depression sat on him like a nightmare and stole the breath of his motivation. He forced himself to try to understand Machuk's aloofness when he would rather have retreated inward and left her to sulk alone. The validation of Machuk's trust would have helped, but he couldn't count on that. He had no choice but to hope. Night came, and there was nowhere to shelter. They made a fire in the open, using old clothes Machuk had found strewn about the base of another bizarre altar. The fire burned green. "This place has some magic about it," Sparrow said, trying to explain the color of the flame. "Something happened, probably after the collapse, to change the ley magic here. This isn't a good place to stay for long." Lomap shook his head and made a face. Sparrow's gesture databank indicated that his expression was one of disapproval. "I feel it too," Machuk said. Then she started singing. She sang a low song, rumbling and tumultuous. It was in a language Sparrow had never heard. When she was done, she lay on a wad of shirts and went to sleep. Sparrow stayed up with Lomap, who stared at the distance for a long time. Something far away started singing Machuk's song. A warbling voice rose from a bank of glassy dunes. Sparrow and Lomap looked that way until the song stopped. "Will you keep watch tonight?" Sparrow asked. Lomap nodded. In the morning, he was gone. His footprints went toward the glassy dunes. He'd brought nothing with him when he left. Machuk forbade Sparrow to search for him. "He heard the voice of Juk," she said. "He has to follow, and we can't." "What he heard was not the voice of Juk," Sparrow replied. "It was a still fairy." "You have to trust our faith." "That isn't rational. You kept him alive in that shack." "I protected him from the faithless," Machuk insisted. "It's the same thing I'm doing now." Sparrow complied with Machuk. It didn't feel like the right thing to do, but he did it for her. He wasn't sure what that meant. There was nothing in his database to explain it. They left without kicking the fire out. Machuk rode pillion, and Sparrow pushed his hoverbike as fast as it would go. They sped through twisted, gone suburbs that had been blackened from orbit. Docile platforms grazed distant fields of phosphorus. The last stretch was a gullied salt flat with a crashed spaceship in it. Sparrow and Machuk slept in the ship when night came. It was freezing cold. They huddled together on his rubber blanket while she shivered. He turned his temperature sensitivity down as far as it would go. What was in his chest? A heart? Or a power plant? Real life? Or just foxfire? Whatever it was, he hoped it would keep Machuk warm. They slept through the morning and left at midday after Machuk ate the last can of white beans. The wasteland ended at a wall of mountains so wide that they couldn't see the ends of it. Sparrow stopped his hoverbike and they dismounted. They stood staring up at the sheer cliff together. "What mountains are these?" Sparrow said. "I don't know," replied Machuk. "This is magic. This wasn't here before. We would have seen it from far away." "Magic mountains?" Machuk sighed. "Why? How?" "Let's find out," Sparrow said. He turned east and started walking. He pulled his bike with Machuk sitting on it. They walked for an hour, looking for anything, and they came to a colossal silver gate. It stood in the mountain wall, higher than either of them could see. It was made of impossibly huge planks, and its frames were one solid piece of ivory. Sparrow rapped on the gate with his knuckles. "This is the gate of sleep," he said. "It's a magical barrier. We have to pass through it in our dreams." Machuk slid from the hoverbike's saddle and went to the gate. She flattened her hands against it and pushed, looking up at the clouds that hid its top. "How is that possible?" "With dream magic," Sparrow replied. "I say an incantation. We go to sleep, and then something happens. After we go through the gate and wake up on the other side." "Something happens," said Machuk. "You don't know more than that?" "What happens is always different," Sparrow said. "It depends on who cast the barrier. We can't tell what we'll see. I'm sorry. That's the way these things work." Machuk sat down against the gate. "Juk is testing me. I was asleep when she called Lomap, and now she is weighing my faith." "That gives you maybe," Sparrow said. "I can give you definitely. I know how to surmount this obstacle. Do you trust me?" "It doesn't matter whether I do or not, does it?" Machuk said. "What are the risks?" Sparrow didn't want to tell Machuk about the harrowing. She had to believe that he was the master of his power, and he could take it. He could carry the emotional load. It was a matter of will. "The risks will be mine," he said. "All you need to do is go to sleep." With that, we are finished with Chapter 6. And we are moving into a part of the story that was legitimately scary for me to write. Hopefully, it won't be too scary for you to listen to when you are trying to relax. As always, thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next video.